Aloha! Welcome, you have just entered K-Dub's place again. Today is June 17th, 2016, and we are transmitting from high atop the Zenton Towers, somewhere out on the edge of town. Today we will be reading from the book It Seems Like a Good Idea at the Time, subtitled The Real-Life Antics of a 20th Century Kid. And our subject matter today will focus around the wild and crazy year of 1968. Yes, excuse me. In the month of August of 1968, I think I turned 15, and we're going to get some ruminations going on some events of that day. Excuse me. So, here we go. And hope everybody's having a good day today. When 1968 began, the anti-war fever was boiling over. 1967 had already seen a major breakout of protest marches and demonstrations, primarily directed toward the Johnson administration, and the president and his boys were certainly losing control of the situation. Before the new year started, Senator Eugene McCarthy had thrown his hat into the ring of the upcoming presidential election. He was one of the current congressional spokespersons for immediate withdrawal of our troops in Vietnam, and it looked like his support was growing rapidly and that Johnson was starting to feel the pinch. As much as I've always had respect for the good senator from Minnesota, and I did support his independent candidacy for president in '76, he's always seemed more like a professor than a politician, which is cool, but it doesn't usually get you elected. The college kids loved him, but the voting age was still 21 at the time, so that didn't get him all that far. Still, his support grew as each new body count came in from the war. And in the beginning, he was the lone wolf of the anti-war advocates running for the crown. That was until March. As the winter was coming to an end, so was the holdout position of Bobby Kennedy. Even though his older brother's administration, which he was a part of, was responsible for the eventual buildup of our involvement in Southeast Asia, Bobby had come to his senses since and was now a leading proponent of the anti-war position. Early in that month of March, Bobby declared his candidacy, and the walls of the Oval Office started shaking. I was always under the impression that the Kennedy and Johnson camps didn't get along so well. But in 1960, it was obvious that the election was going to be tight, and JFK needed Texas in his victory column, so putting LBJ on the ticket was the logical choice from an electoral perspective. Still, I don't think they trusted each other, especially after his brother's assassination, and Bobby getting into the race probably was not just a pro-war or anti-war decision. Johnson's gang smelled blood immediately, and it was their own. There was always the chance that the anti-war sentiment could possibly lift McCarthy to victory at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. But when Kennedy got in the race, he became an instant probable front-runner, and Johnson declared that he would not seek re-election a couple of weeks later. It's been said that Johnson got out because of McCarthy's showing in the New Hampshire primary, but he didn't actually do it until Bobby's announcement. Anyway, it looked to me to be an exciting election year, for I was a big fan of Bobby Kennedy's and gave me some hope amidst all the usual bullshit. I should have known that the missed free throw in my short basketball career would be a harbinger of bad fortune to come. Sorry, I'll tell that story some other time. About a week after Johnson cut bait and split from the presidential race, the greatest leader of the American civil rights movement was gunned down in Memphis. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was, in my opinion, to the second half of the 20th century what Mahatma Gandhi was to the first half. Both men espoused the noble causes of freedom, equality, and peace, with the message and advocacy of nonviolence. Both men led their people to victories, although not complete ones, through diligence, patience, and strength, while constant acts of violence and injustice were brought down upon them. With Gandhi's work, India and Pakistan became independent nations, free from the stranglehold of British rule. Through Dr. King's leadership, the civil rights movement won significant victories in the areas of racial equality, although it is still an ongoing process. Here in America, through the reworking of the legal system, but just as importantly through the changing of attitudes in white America. And like Gandhi, King was assassinated for his political beliefs and activity. Almost immediately upon hearing of the tragedy in Memphis, the nation caught fire, literally. I remember from certain locations on the Little River Turnpike, which was the main drag going through our neck of the woods, and from our lofty perch in white suburbia, seeing the smoke billowing over Washington, D.C., stoked by the rage of the African American community. It was the same in countless urban centers across the country. It had only been 4.5 years since JFK's murder, and it was still fresh in our minds. Was this going to be the ongoing fate of all our hopes and dreams, or merely another act of American violence? Another random act of American violence. The riots and the burning lasted a week in some places, but the real effect, of course, lasted much longer. Still, time marched on, and there was more work to be done, elections to be won, and causes to be championed before our walk in the sun. I mean, we still had Bobby, after all. Between the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, women's liberation movement, which was starting to catch fire as well, the streets of America had become one continuous battleground in 1968. But amidst it all, there were those of us who felt that there was still a chance, however slim, to send the forces of doom underground to wallow in their bigotry and hatred where their actions could be of little consequence. I don't mean to speak for anyone else, but for me, Bobby was that chance. I was not yet 15, but even then I felt the powers of good riding to our rescue in the form of this white knight from Massachusetts, even though he was currently a senator from New York. Although he sprang from a family of wealth, power, and position, he was embraced by groups of various, diverse persuasions around our nation. From the African American population to the coal mines of West Virginia, from the students to the large voting bloc of senior citizens, from the labor unions to the field workers in California, the vitality, honesty, and vision that Bobby Kennedy brought to the table was unprecedented, even compared to his slain brother. I wasn't old enough to vote, but I could sure watch with great anticipation. My father would eventually come around to opposing the war and voting against its funding, but for the time being he was still a Johnson kind of guy and was probably pulling for Johnson's man Hubert Humphrey, who had been his vice president for the last few years. My dad's congressional district was home for several defense contractors, and consequently his electorate was composed of multitudes of defense contractor employees. So it was a wise play at the time to support the government's policies in the war, seeing as how it brought much capital into the lives of so many. In a couple of years, he would reverse his voting record by walking out of the darkness and into the light on his path to his opposition of the war and its funding. But that was in the future. So in the early months of 1968, Dad was still an old-school Democrat, toeing the line, as they say. Besides, it was an election year for him, too, so he had to watch his step. And in June, he was in Los Angeles, shoring up the foundation of his job in his quest for another primary victory. The night of the California primary, my mom had the TV on upstairs in her bedroom, waiting for election results and a call from Dad, no doubt informing her that he had been victorious. My brother Bill and I were the only other ones in the house. My two older brothers were off doing whatever. Don had just finished his first year at Georgetown, and Brother Steve had just finished his third year at USC and was still in LA, hanging out with my dad at my grandmother's house the night of the election. Anyway, I chanced to head upstairs at some point and walked into Mom's room at what must have been just moments after it happened. At first the news coverage seemed chaotic and I wasn't sure exactly what was going on, But it didn't take long for me to get the picture. Bobby Kennedy had just won the California primary, and with the momentum he had at that point, would be the odds-on favorite to be the Democratic nominee for president. The problem was that he had just been gunned down by a lone shooter while leaving the crowded ballroom where he had just given his victory speech. Another lone shooter. When his brother was shot and killed, it was blamed on a lone shooter. Of course, anyone with two eyes, or even one for that matter, who had seen the whole Zapruder footage of JFK's assassination knows that it's an impossibility that he was shot by one lone shooter. Now, in Bobby's case, the kitchen was swarming with people, and it seemed certain that his death came at the hands of one man. But to say that Bobby's killer, not unlike Dr. King's killer, was not set up by some other evil human individual or individuals is somewhat naive, in my humble opinion. It is in the realm of possibility, but I feel highly unlikely. So there it was. 3 of the great hopes of the 20th century rubbed out in less than 5 years. For the next couple of days, I remember walking slowly like a zombie up and down Randolph Drive in a complete depressed daze. My soul was toast, and I wasn't even 15 years old yet. Fortunately, school was out, for there's no way that my brain would have been able to function well enough to find my way there. If I had any utopian dreams of the future left in me at that point, they were only hanging on by the most minuscule of threads, and the year was only half over. So, what had been the summer of love in '67 with flowers and beads and Sgt. Pepper turned into the summer of darkness, violence, and shattered dreams in '68. Even the Beatles, who had just created Apple and gone into business for themselves, were at the dawn of their breakup, but didn't even know it yet. And all over, the music got darker. What I consider to be 3 of my favorite Rolling Stones songs were out that year and seemed to represent the angst and edginess of the time. Jumpin' Jack Flash, Sympathy for the Devil, and Street Fightin' Man were all done during the Beggar's Banquet sessions, my favorite Stones album as well, and for me became theme songs for the Revolution. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of great music going down that year, but for my money, the Stones and the Beatles were what was happening. The Beatles came out with yet another amazing double A-side single. Actually, Hey Jude was considered the A-side, but Revolution was no slouch. The first time I heard Hey Jude was in the car with my mom, and as usual with the Beatles, I couldn't believe it. It was just so cool and ran longer than any top 40 song in history as far as I know. Lady Madonna was another single of theirs that year, another song that didn't sound like anything else before or after. Plus, the flip side of that one was George's The Inner Light, an Indian-influenced tune with sitars and such. Not bad for top 40 radio. The one lighthearted romp through all this madness was the release of Yellow Submarine, the movie. Along with Fantasia, it was one of my favorite animated films, and like Fantasia, the music is largely responsible. Of course, what the Beatles were primarily working on all that year was the album that would come out on the 5th anniversary of JFK's assassination, the White Album. With songs like Happiness is a Warm Gun, Piggies, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Year Blues, Helter Skelter, and even Revolution, number 9. It seemed the perfect album to close out this bizarre year. There are a lot of great movies released in '67 and '68 as well, from the disillusionment of an obsession of The Graduate to the creepiness of Rosemary's Baby and The Night of the Living Dead, to the violence of Bonnie and Clyde and If, with the great Malcolm McDowell, to the edgy thriller Wait Until Dark, to the racial tension of In the Heat of the Night. There were a lot of representatives of the times. Also in '68, one of my favorite war movies, Where Eagles Dare with my man Richard Burton, was released. And let's not forget that spacey and beautiful masterpiece of sci-fi, 2001. Get the Strauss in the background. On the little screen, there were plenty of shows catering to the times as well, especially the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour with its irreverence and great musical guests. There were also a number of other great variety shows on TV in the late 60s and early 70s, such as Dean Martin's show, Johnny Cash's show, and Tom Jones' show, and of course The Tonight Show with the late, great Johnny Carson. And David Frost and Dick Cavett provided intelligent interview shows. On top of that, Piers Morgan, bow your lowly head. Sometime shortly after Bobby Kennedy's assassination, I went back to the House Democratic cloakroom for about a month's worth of work as a Capitol page. This year, Congress adjourned earlier than it had the previous summer due to it being an election year and the presidential conventions were getting ready to kick in. For some reason or other, I only worked about a month and got paid for 2. What a gig. My dad had some postal workers' conventions to address before and after the Democratic National Convention, which is going to be held in Chicago that year. Being a congressman from California, he would have been a delegate from his home state to the event, but instead decided to take my mother, my brother Bill, and myself with him to the 2 stops he had to make in Minneapolis and Boston, enjoying a bit of summer vacation at the same time. So we hopped in the car and headed for Minnesota first. I seem to recall that everywhere we went in that lovely state, there was a lake. Now, while in Minneapolis, we went to a Twins ball game, but that's about all I remember, except for my desire to get closer to some of the lovely maidens in that fair town. My libido had not backed off yet. Quite the contrary. Anyway, after our time there, we proceeded to drive around Chicago and avoid the convention. Boy, that was a smart move. While we were off the road and in our hotel rooms, we'd hit the TV, of course. The whole world is watching, was the chant that was coming out of the tube. And we watched along with the rest of the world as the Chicago police, under Mayor Richard Daley's direction, beat the young anti-war protesters to a pulp as they congregated and marched to the convention site. 10,000 demonstrators met up with 23,000 Chicago policemen and National Guardsmen. The use of tear gas on the street was so alarmingly intense that it found its way into Hubert Humphrey's hotel room up many flights and caused him discomfort and teary eyes. Mace was used indiscriminately on protesters and bystanders alike. When Senator Abraham Ribicoff got up to nominate George McGovern, he used the opportunity to tell the conventioners about what was going on outside the hall. In response, Mayor Daley stood up and yelled, "Fuck you, you Jew son of a bitch! You lousy motherfucker, go home!" Yeah, we were probably in Niagara Falls at the time, on our way to Boston watching it all play out. In the meantime, Hubert Humphrey got nominated and chose another mamby-pamby guy, Senator Edwin Muskie, as his running mate. Still, the Vietnam War raged on with the multitudes of American soldiers dying in the rice paddies and jungles. Graham Nash wrote and sang a song about the whole Chicago fiasco a couple years later. It was called Chicago, of course. We can change the world. Nice sentiment. Maybe one day it will be true. So we made it to Boston in one piece. While there, we saw another baseball game. This one was at Fenway with the Red Sox hosting someone, although I can't remember who. We had a great day at the ballpark, and we're heading back to the hotel, walking by the convention site where Dad was going to address the Postal Service guys the next day. As he and I were walking by there was a big crowd waiting for something, but we couldn't see what was going on yet. All of a sudden, John McCormick, who was Speaker of the House at the time and from Boston, yelled out to my dad from well within the throngs of people, "Hey Charlie, come and follow me!" So Dad got me moving in that direction, which ended up leading into the auditorium, down the middle aisle and towards the stage with a packed house cheering us on. At least it seemed like they were cheering for us. Then as we were about halfway to the stage, I chanced to turn around and saw Hubert Humphrey, who had just become the nominee for president, right behind us with the Secret Service guys around him, making sure we kept moving. We were led up to the stage and seated at this long table along with McCormick, Humphrey, and some Postal Service bigwigs. Of course, having just come from the game, we were tired and sweaty and extremely casually dressed. And to make things worse, I really had to take a leak. Badly. And the table we were sitting at had nothing draped over it so as to block the audience's vision of the lower halves of our bodies, and I was already starting to squirm in response to the heavy fluid buildup in my bladder. Fortunately for them, my mom and Bill had gone back to the hotel room to freshen up, oblivious of the torture I was being put through. Of course, Dad lived for this kind of thing and got up to the microphone and make a couple of jokes about the ball game and our ragged appearance, while I was sure that my fluids were going to find their way to the exterior of my shorts. However, I've always been pretty good at holding it back when necessary, and this was definitely one of those times. So somehow I survived the possibility of total humiliation, and we eventually got to leave the scene to head back to the hotel rooms. In the meantime, Dad had made arrangements with Humphrey to join us at the hotel so we could have our picture taken with him. So we went back, rousted Mom and Bill from whatever they were doing. Humphrey came in, and Bill and I posed smiling with, even though I wasn't a big fan, the man who would hopefully be our next president. He seemed like a nice guy, but then almost all politicians seem like nice guys when they're shaking your hand and smiling for the camera. Of course, he was up against the evil Richard Nixon, so he had my best wishes at the time. After the convention was over the next day, they paraded us around town in a convertible, and we got to sit on the top of the back seat waving to the crowd. I remember hoping that I hadn't pissed off anyone in Boston who might have a rifle. We made it out of town just fine, thank you. That all took place during the last week in August. So I'm sure my sophomore year at Jefferson must have started immediately upon my return. Okay, let's take a little romp through the big hits in 1968. Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song, make it better. Morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in. I was born in a violent hurricane. Yeah. There must be somewhere out of here, said the joker to the thief. Bend me, shake me any way you want me, long as you love me, it's alright. Bend me, shake me any way you want me, you got the power to turn on the light. Let your motors running, head out on the highway, ain't all an adventure, even whatever comes our way. I've been more from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's love's illusions I recall. Chain, 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 chain of fools. Chain, 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 chain of fools. Do you know the way to San Jose? I got the bum and I only boom. Gone up the country, country you wanna go. I'm gone up the country, they don't wanna go. My green tambourine. You say yes, I say no. You say stop, I say go, go, go. fine city light, open my eyes to take a peek. Please find that I was by the sea, gazing in tranquility. Hush, hush, thought I heard her calling my name. Now hush, hush, no one will say now. You gotta feel, baby. The look of love is in your eyes. I want it, I want it, I want it, I want it now. Remember that one? It's getting dawn. That's what I meant to play. Take a load of a fanny. Take a load for free. Take a load of a fanny. You put the load right on me. Okay, that's about it for tonight. I'm gonna go back into my easy chair and get out of the limelight here. So, see you next time, and keep the faith, baby.